The chandeliers sparkled like frozen constellations above the ballroom, their golden light spilling across polished marble floors and silk-draped tables. 100 voices mingled in polite laughter, and the string quartet's notes floated as delicately as crystal wine glasses lifted in toast. It should have been a perfect night, the kind of evening young women were taught to dream of since childhood. Yet to Amara Johnson, standing at the top of the grand staircase in her ivory gown, it felt less like a celebration and more like a funeral procession her own. The gown had been sewn by Parisian hands, every stitch deliberate, every bead shimmering under the light. On her head rested a diamond tiara that once belonged to her grandmother, an heirloom worth more than most families would earn in a lifetime. It weighed heavy not just on her hair, but on her spirit, pressing her down like a crown of thorns. To the world, she looked like a queen ascending to her throne. To Amara, she was a prisoner, paraded in silk. From across the room, she caught sight of Marcus Sterling, her soon-to-be fiancé. He was everything her father admired in a man, tall, polished, confident, and backed by a fortune that rivaled their own. His smile gleamed with the precision of someone who practiced charm like a weapon. When their eyes met, Amara felt her skin crawl. She could already imagine the life that awaited her at his side, a life of charity galas, photo spreads, and cold hands holding hers only for the sake of appearances. Her father, Richard Johnson, stood proudly near the podium, watching her with a satisfaction that chilled her blood. He didn't see a daughter. He saw an investment, an alliance sealed not with love, but with contracts. She had been raised to be flawless, educated in the finest schools, trained to speak 3 languages fluently, to identify the brushstrokes of Renaissance painters, to hold a wine glass at just the right angle for photographers. Every detail of her existence had been sculpted for this moment. And yet, as the orchestra swelled, Amara felt something deep within her rebel, a whisper that had lived in her since girlhood, soft but insistent. This is not your life. This is not your story. Her hands trembled slightly as she touched the diamond pendant at her throat, a gift from her late mother, who had once whispered to her, "Never let them write your story for you, Amara. One day you'll have to choose whether to live as they want or as you are meant to." That day had come. The applause grew as Marcus stepped onto the platform. He held out his hand for her, his expression so polished, so perfect, it almost disguised the hollowness behind his eyes. Amara forced her feet to move each step, echoing in her ears like the tolling of a bell. She could hear the guests murmuring, feel the weight of hundreds of eyes waiting for her to accept the future already decided for her. Yet inside her chest, her heart beat against its cage, wild and desperate. She thought of the life she was about to lose forever, the laughter she would never share, the love she would never know, the freedom that would remain a dream. She thought of the girl she used to be, the one who ran barefoot through the grass behind her family's summer home, who painted in secret when her tutors weren't looking, who once believed that her heart belonged to her alone. And she realized with startling clarity that if she said yes tonight, that girl would die. The orchestra paused, and a hush swept over the ballroom. Marcus reached for her hand. Amara smiled faintly because that was what was expected of her, but in her soul she was already running. She felt the storm gathering beyond the glass doors that led to the garden. The wind rattled the roses in their crystal vases as if the world itself urged her to act. As Marcus began to speak, Amara drew in a steadying breath. The tiara dug painfully into her scalp. The diamonds on her gown glittered like chains, and yet she had never felt closer to freedom. Tonight she would make a choice. Tonight she would take back her story. The world believed they were witnessing the beginning of a grand union. They had no idea they were about to watch the first step in an escape that would change every life it touched. And for those of you listening now, for those who feel the weight of expectations pressing against your own spirit, I invite you to take this journey with Amara, because her story is more than just love. It's about courage, sacrifice, and finding a place where the heart is truly free. If her struggle moves you, let your heart speak back. Share your thoughts in the comments, leave a kind word, and follow this channel so that together we can keep breathing life into stories that remind us we are never truly alone. For now, hold your breath with her. The gilded prison is about to break. The applause still echoed in the grand ballroom as Amara Johnson slipped through the side doors, her breath coming quick and shallow, her silk gown whispering against the marble as though urging her forward. No one had noticed yet. The music, the chatter, the clinking of champagne glasses, they all provided her with a shield of sound. But she knew the illusion would not last. Beyond the glass doors, the world was changing. The sky, once painted in the soft blush of evening, had darkened to a restless gray, heavy with the promise of rain. The air carried the scent of the sea, sharp and bracing, as if nature itself had conspired to set her free. She ran down the stone steps into the courtyard, her satin heels slipping against the damp stone. Thunder rolled in the distance, low and threatening like a warning bell. Her heart pounded in time with it. For the first time in years, it was not the rhythm of an orchestra or the measured steps of a dance her father had chosen. It was her own. She had planned nothing. There had been no time, no secret map, no hidden bag waiting for her under a bed. Only instinct guided her feet, that desperate whisper urging her to flee before the cage closed forever. She glanced over her shoulder. The ballroom windows glowed like watchful eyes. At any moment, someone would notice the bride-to-be had vanished. Then she saw it. Just beyond the fountain park near the garden wall, a sleek motorcycle. Its chrome glinted faintly under the storm clouds, a striking contrast against the manicured roses. Her pulse quickened. She had learned to ride once in secret during a reckless summer at boarding school. It had been one of the few things in her life she had done only for herself. And now that half-forgotten rebellion might be her salvation. The motorcycle belonged to one of her father's security detail. She recognized the key ring dangling carelessly from the pocket of a discarded jacket nearby. The rain had begun to fall, soft drops at first, then harder, 1,000 silver needles against her skin. With trembling hands, Amara seized the keys. "Forgive me," she whispered to no one, and everyone then mounted the bike. The engine roared to life, startling her with its fierce growl. Thunder answered, and in that moment, Amara felt the surge of something she hadn't tasted in years: freedom. She twisted the throttle, and the bike leapt forward, tires scattering gravel as she shot down the winding drive, leaving behind the golden prison and the carefully curated life her father had built for her. The storm broke open. Sheets of rain lashed against her face, blurring the road ahead. Her gown, once pristine, clung to her legs like a heavy banner, its jeweled hem now nothing more than a sodden weight. Wind whipped her hair into wild curls that stung her cheeks, but she did not care. Every drop of rain washed away a little more of the girl who had been paraded on a stage, and beneath the storm, a new Amara was being born. The Oregon coast stretched before her, wild and untamed. The road curved along cliffs where the sea raged below, waves smashing against jagged rocks in a furious symphony. The motorcycle leaned into each turn, and with every mile, Amara felt the distance grow between herself and the life she had been forced into. But freedom, she quickly discovered, came at a price. The fuel gauge flickered dangerously close to empty. The engine coughed, sputtered, and her heart lurched. She urged it forward, whispering prayers she hadn't spoken in years. Yet within minutes, the bike shuddered one last time before falling silent. The world around her went still, except for the relentless rain and the crash of the ocean below. She coasted to the side of the narrow road and pushed the motorcycle onto a patch of gravel. Darkness had settled, broken only by the thin ribbon of her headlights. Her gown was soaked through her skin, chilled to the bone. She looked around desperately. The road stretched empty in both directions, bordered by forests so dense they seemed to swallow the world. For a moment, panic clawed at her chest. What had she done? She had escaped one prison only to strand herself in another one, made of isolation and storm. Then through the blur of rain, she saw a faint golden glow. A window, warm and inviting, set back from the road down a narrow gravel path. Hope surged. She gathered the drenched folds of her gown and stumbled toward it, her shoes slipping in the mud. The path led to a modest workshop, its sign swaying gently in the storm. Hayes Restoration. The wooden letters were weathered, the paint faded, but the glow from within promised shelter. Amara hesitated at the small side door, her hand hovering over the handle. What would she say? Who would she be now? She could not knock on a stranger's door and announce, "I am Amara Johnson, daughter of Richard Johnson, runaway heiress." That name would send her straight back to the life she had fled. So she swallowed her fear, gripped the handle, and pushed. The scent of polished wood and faint traces of coffee greeted her, rich and comforting. Rows of workbenches lined the room, covered with chisels, planes, and half-finished furniture, pieces gleaming softly under the lamplight. It was not the world of crystal chandeliers and marble halls she had known. It was simple, grounded, real. For the first time that night, Amara's trembling eased. She stepped further in, unaware that her arrival had not gone unnoticed. From the shadows, a man's voice, deep and calm, broke the silence. "Don't move." Amara froze, her heart hammering in her chest. She turned slowly, the storm still raging behind her, and met the steady gaze of Daniel Hayes. His flannel sleeves were rolled up to reveal strong forearms, marked with faint scars from years of work. And though his posture was cautious, there was a glimmer of concern in his eyes as they fell on the stranger before him, drenched, shivering, and clad in a ruined wedding gown. Amara drew in a shaky breath. I didn't mean to intrude," she whispered. "I just needed somewhere safe." And though she didn't know it yet, that single choice to open the door of Hayes Restoration on a storm-lashed night would change the course of all their lives forever. Daniel Hayes stood framed by the glow of a single overhead lamp, a baseball bat loosely gripped in his calloused hands. His flannel shirt clung damply to his broad shoulders, and faint traces of sawdust dusted the edges of his jeans. He looked every bit the man of labor, a stark contrast to the polished, practiced faces Amara had left behind in that glittering ballroom. Yet it wasn't the bat that made her heart race. It was his eyes, green, steady, unflinching. Eyes that had clearly seen more than their share of disappointment and loss, and yet still held a trace of warmth, as though he hadn't let life steal his capacity for gentleness. "I'm sorry," Amara whispered, her voice barely carrying over the hum of rain pelting the workshop roof. She lifted her trembling hands to show she meant no harm. "I didn't mean to break in. The door was unlocked. I just—" Her voice cracked. "I just needed somewhere safe." Daniel's gaze traveled over her, pausing at the sodden folds of the ruined wedding gown clinging to her frame, the diamond tiara askew in her tangled curls. Suspicion flickered across his face, followed by something else, concern. Slowly, he set the bat aside. "You're drenched," he said quietly. "You'll catch your death standing there like that." Relief swept through Amara so powerfully her knees nearly gave way. She nodded quickly, though she had no words left. Daniel hesitated, then gestured toward the staircase tucked into the corner of the workshop. "There's an apartment upstairs," he said. "It isn't much, but it's warm. You can get dry." Amara's chest tightened. She wanted to trust him, needed to, but she also knew how fragile her secret was. If he knew her real name, if he connected her to the runaway headlines that would soon flood the news, she'd lose this fragile chance at freedom. She lowered her eyes and whispered the name she hadn't spoken in years. "Maya, my name is Maya." Daniel studied her for a moment longer. She held her breath, wondering if he could see through the lie. Then with a small nod, he said, "All right, Maya, let's get you upstairs before you freeze." The apartment above Hayes Restoration was nothing like the grand suites Amara had grown up in. Its ceilings were low, the walls painted a soft cream. A modest brick fireplace glowed with the faint embers of an earlier fire. A well-worn couch sat angled toward the hearth, a patchwork quilt folded neatly across its back. The kitchen was small, with children's drawings pinned to the refrigerator in a chaotic rainbow. It smelled faintly of cedar soap and something warm she couldn't quite name. It felt like home. Daniel handed her a stack of towels from the linen closet. "There's a bathroom down the hall," he said. "I'll find you something dry to wear." Amara clutched the towels to her chest, murmured a shaky thank you, and slipped into the bathroom. The mirror reflected a stranger back at her, a woman who looked as though she'd stepped out of a fairy tale gone wrong. Mascara streaked her cheeks, the tiara sat crooked, and her once pristine gown sagged in ruined folds. For the first time, she almost laughed at the absurdity. A runaway bride in a stranger's bathroom. Who would believe it? She removed the tiara and set it gently on the counter, her fingers lingering over the cool metal as if she were leaving behind a piece of her old self. The gown's complicated fastenings nearly defeated her until Daniel knocked softly on the door. "I left some clothes outside," he said, his voice steady, unassuming. When she emerged moments later wrapped in a worn sweatshirt and sweatpants far too big for her, Daniel was in the kitchen pouring steaming coffee into 2 mugs. His eyes lifted, and for the first time that night, a hint of softness touched his features. "Better?" he asked. "Much," Amara said, her voice low. She brushed damp curls from her face, feeling suddenly exposed without the armor of jewels and silk. Daniel slid a mug toward her. "Coffee, it's strong." The warmth seeped through her chilled fingers as she held it. The simple kindness nearly undid her. She had been surrounded her whole life by servants and staff, yet she could not recall a single moment that had felt as human as this. He studied her over the rim of his cup. "You said you needed somewhere safe." A pause. "Are you running from someone?" The question struck deep, sharper than she expected. Amara lowered her gaze, carefully weaving her half-truth. "Yes. I was supposed to marry a man tonight." She forced a small, brittle laugh. "But I couldn't. I had to leave." Daniel's brow furrowed. "Did he hurt you?" "Not physically," she said quickly. The words felt raw on her tongue. "But the marriage wasn't my choice." Something in Daniel's expression softened further. He leaned back in his chair, green eyes, steady voice, quiet. "Then maybe walking away was the bravest thing you've ever done." Amara's throat tightened. No one had ever called her brave before. She had always been called obedient, perfect, valuable, never brave. Before she could respond, a soft creak on the stairs drew their attention. A little girl padded into the doorway, rubbing her sleepy eyes, clutching a worn stuffed rabbit. She had Daniel's green eyes, though her hair was a lighter shade that tumbled in loose waves. "Daddy," she mumbled, "I heard voices." Daniel's face changed instantly, the hardness melting into warmth. "Hey, sweetheart." "Couldn't sleep." The girl shook her head, eyes fixing curiously on Amara. "Who's that?" "This is Maya," Daniel said gently. "She got caught in the storm. She'll stay with us for a little while." The child tilted her head, studying Amara with a frankness only children possess. "Are you a princess?" The question caught Amara off guard. She let out a soft laugh, shaking her head. "Why would you think that?" "You have princess hair," the girl said matter-of-factly. "Even when it's wet, and you talk like the ladies in my storybooks." Heat rushed to Amara's cheeks. She glanced at Daniel, expecting amusement or suspicion. Instead, he looked at her with something she couldn't quite name, curiosity maybe, or recognition. Kneeling to the girl's level, Amara smiled softly. "No, I'm not a princess, just someone who got very lost in the rain." The little girl's eyes lit up. "That's okay. Daddy and I are good at helping people who get lost." Daniel chuckled quietly, ruffling his daughter's hair. "This is Lily," he said. Amara's heart clenched at the name, so simple, so innocent. She reached out gently. "It's very nice to meet you, Lily." As the storm raged on outside, Amara realized with a sudden piercing clarity that she had stumbled not just into a workshop for restoring broken wood, but into the lives of 2 people who might, without even knowing it, help her restore something far more fragile herself. The storm lingered through the night, the rain drumming steadily against the workshop roof, as if determined to wash the world clean. Upstairs, Amara, now Maya, sat on the edge of a small bed in the guest room Daniel had offered her, clutching the patchwork quilt around her shoulders. The firelight from the living room below sent a faint glow through the crack under her door, a reminder that she was not alone, though she felt as though she had been cast into another universe entirely. The room was simple, yet every detail spoke of care. A vest of daisies sat on the dresser, their petals a little wilted but still cheerful. A stack of books leaned against the lamp on the bedside table, children's fairy tales with bent covers and creased pages from eager little hands. There was nothing extravagant here, no gleaming marble floors or gold-framed portraits. And yet it felt warmer than the palatial mansion where she had grown up. She drew in a slow breath. How strange that in fleeing from a world of excess, she had found comfort in its very opposite. Still, she knew she was a stranger here. She had no right to belong. Downstairs, muffled voices floated up. Daniel's low murmur, steady and gentle, and the softer, higher tones of Lily as she asked questions with the curiosity only a child could possess. Amara closed her eyes and let herself listen. She could almost imagine she was part of it, that if she stepped into the light, she might be welcome. But the truth lingered sharp in her chest. She was lying, and the lie had already taken root. A knock sounded softly on her door. She startled, clutching the quilt tighter. Maya Daniels' voice, low and careful. "Do you need anything?" She hesitated before answering. "I'm fine, thank you." There was a pause, then the faint scrape of footsteps retreating. Relief and regret tangled in her chest. She wanted to call him back, to ask him to sit beside her, to tell her she wasn't a fool for running. But what would she say? "My name isn't Maya. I'm Amara Johnson, the runaway bride your television will soon expose." The words turned to ash on her tongue. She lay back against the pillow, her damp curls spread like ink across the fabric. Sleep came fitfully broken by flashes of memory. The gleam of Marcus Sterling's cold smile, the steel in her father's eyes, the suffocating applause of hundreds of strangers. She woke before dawn, her heart racing, tears damp on her cheeks. From the kitchen drifted the smell of coffee brewing, rich and earthy. She followed it like a moth to a flame. Daniel stood at the counter, sleeves rolled to his elbows, stirring sugar into a mug. The morning light caught in his hair, burnishing it to a soft gold. He turned when he heard her, his eyes briefly widening, before settling into that same steady calm that had steadied her the night before. "Morning," he said simply. "I didn't want to wake you." Amara pulled the oversized sweatshirt tighter around herself, embarrassed by the way it dwarfed her frame. "I couldn't sleep much." He nodded, sliding a mug across the counter toward her. "It happens." For a while they stood in companionable silence, the clink of spoons and the hum of the old refrigerator, the only sounds between them. Lily soon padded into the kitchen, her stuffed rabbit tucked under one arm, her face lighting up when she saw Amara. "You stayed," Lily said, with the wonder of a child who feared good things vanished overnight. Amara smiled softly. "I did." "Good," Lily declared. "Because Daddy makes pancakes on Saturdays." She tugged Amara toward the table, as though the matter were already decided. Amara laughed, a sound she hadn't heard from her own lips in longer than she could remember. She sat as Daniel flipped batter onto a skillet, the scent of vanilla and butter filling the small kitchen. Watching him move with practiced ease, she felt a strange ache in her chest. This quiet, imperfect, beautiful morning was everything she had never been allowed to imagine for herself. But as Lily chattered about her drawings and Daniel listened with a patience that spoke volumes, Amara's gaze drifted to the window. Somewhere beyond those walls, the world was already searching for her. She pictured her father's fury, the headlines screaming, "Heiress vanishes from Sterling Gala." It was only a matter of time before her name, her real name, invaded this fragile sanctuary. "Do you always help strangers?" she asked quietly, watching Daniel set a plate of pancakes on the table. He glanced at her, his expression unreadable. "Not always, but you didn't look like someone who'd last the night out there." His eyes lingered just a moment too long. "Besides, Lily would never forgive me if I'd sent you away." The child grinned, syrup already smeared across her cheek. "See, I told you we help lost people." Amara's throat tightened. She wanted to believe them. She wanted to let herself sink into this new life, to forget the lies, the obligations, the gilded prison she had fled. But the truth pressed heavier with every heartbeat. She was not Maya. She was not a woman free to stay. She was a stranger upstairs, welcome perhaps, but never truly belonging. As the rain eased outside, Amara realized the hardest part of her escape had not been running into the storm. It was what came after, choosing whether to remain hidden in borrowed light or to risk everything by telling the truth. For now she smiled at Lily and took a bite of the pancakes Daniel had set before her, savoring their warmth as if she could hold on to the moment forever. But deep inside a whisper stirred. This can't last. The storm had finally broken, leaving the air fresh and sweet, laced with the briny breath of the nearby sea. Sunlight filtered through the curtains of Daniel's modest apartment, painting golden patterns across the kitchen floor. The world outside was washed clean, but inside Amara's chest, the weight of secrecy still pressed heavy. Lily sat cross-legged on the rug near the fireplace, her curls bouncing as she leaned over a sheet of paper crayons scattered around her in a riot of color. Amara knelt beside her, helping to steady the page, as Lily carefully traced the outline of a house, its roof slightly crooked, its windows wide with cheerful yellow squares. "That's Daddy and me," Lily explained, pointing to two stick figures in the yard. Her small hand hovered above the empty space beside them. "And this is for you." Amara's breath caught as Lily pressed a purple crayon into her hand. "For me," she whispered. Lily nodded firmly. "You should be here too. Families need 3 people. 2 isn't enough." Her heart throbbed at the innocence in Lily's words. Carefully, she drew a figure beside them, her hand trembling slightly. It had been so long since she'd been invited to belong anywhere. Lily studied the drawing critically, then looked up at her with a frankness only children possessed. "Are you a princess?" The question tumbled into the quiet room like a pebble dropped into a still pond, rippling outward until it filled every corner. Amara blinked, startled. "Why would you think that?" she asked, gently forcing a smile. "Because you talk like one," Lily said matter-of-factly. "And your hair shines even when it's messy. Daddy says only special people shine like that." Heat rose in Amara's cheeks. She glanced at Daniel, who stood in the doorway watching them, his arms crossed loosely. His eyes softened when their gazes met, though he said nothing. Amara leaned closer to Lily, lowering her voice as though sharing a precious secret. "I'm not a princess, sweet one. I'm just someone who got a little lost." Lily tilted her head, clearly unconvinced. "But maybe you're a princess who doesn't want anyone to know." Daniel chuckled softly from the doorway, the sound low and warm. "You ask too many questions, Lily." The child grinned, unbothered. "Grandma says that's how you learn." "Grandma's right," Daniel admitted, ruffling her curls as he stepped into the room. He looked at Amara, then his expression unreadable but searching, as though he too wondered what truths lay behind her careful smile. Later, after Lily had gone to her room for an afternoon nap, Daniel lingered at the kitchen sink while Amara rinsed their cups. The silence stretched between them until Daniel spoke, his tone quiet but steady. "You didn't answer her question." Amara froze, her hands tightening on the porcelain mug. She forced a soft laugh. "I told her I wasn't a princess." "That's not the answer she was looking for," Daniel said, watching her closely. Her chest tightened. She wanted to tell him everything, that she was the daughter of Richard Johnson, that the world outside was hunting her, even now that the gown she had arrived in was meant to chain her to a man she could never love. But the words tangled in her throat. Instead, she set the mug down and turned away. "Some things are better left unanswered." For a moment, neither spoke. Then Daniel stepped closer, his presence calm yet undeniable. "You don't have to tell me everything," he said softly. "But know this, Maya, you're safe here." Safe. The word lingered in the air between them, a fragile promise. Amara closed her eyes, letting it settle over her like a balm. For one stolen breath, she allowed herself to believe it. And in that quiet, she realized Lily's innocent question was more than a child's curiosity. It was the mirror she had been avoiding, the reminder that no matter what name she gave, she could not hide the truth of who she was forever. The days slipped quietly into one another, each marked not by the sound of orchestra or the flash of cameras, but by the soft scrape of Daniel's tools against wood, the bubbling laughter of Lily, and the unexpected rhythm of a life Amara had never known she longed for. Each morning, sunlight streamed through the workshop's wide windows, casting long golden stripes across the workbenches. Amara found herself drawn there, watching Daniel's hands as they moved with deliberate care, sanding away imperfections from a carved chair or fitting delicate inlays into an antique desk. "You work like it matters," she said once, leaning against the doorway. Daniel glanced up, the faintest smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. "It does matter. These pieces have history. They've survived. They just need someone to believe they're worth saving." Amara felt her breath catch at his words. She wondered if he realized he wasn't only talking about wood. She began to help in small ways, sweeping sawdust, polishing brass handles, organizing the brushes and varnishes. But it wasn't long before her presence shifted from helpful to quietly indispensable. One afternoon, she noticed Daniel considering a desk with an uncertain frown. "It's late 19th century," he murmured, running a finger over the worn surface. "Maybe oak." Rosewood Amara corrected, gently, surprising herself. When he raised an eyebrow, she added, "You can tell by the grain and the reddish undertones. It's rare, worth much more than you think." Daniel studied her curiosity flickering in his eyes. "How do you know that?" Amara hesitated, her pulse quickening. She couldn't tell him the truth that she had spent countless hours with private tutors who trained her to identify antique furniture as easily as she could recite Shakespeare. So instead, she offered the smallest fragment of truth she could. "My grandmother collected antiques," she said softly. "I used to watch her appraisers work." It wasn't a lie, but it wasn't the whole truth either. Daniel nodded slowly, still watching her. "You've got an eye for detail." The warmth in his tone made her chest tighten. She smiled faintly, forcing herself not to flinch under the weight of the unspoken questions in his gaze. That evening, as they ate a simple dinner, grilled fish and roasted vegetables, Lily proudly displayed her latest drawing, the three of them beneath a sun as bright as a golden coin. "See," she announced. "You belong here, Maya." Amara's throat constricted. "It's beautiful," she whispered, brushing her fingers over the page. Daniel glanced at her, his expression unreadable, though something in his eyes softened. "She doesn't let many people in," he said quietly. "Not since her mom." He trailed off, his jaw tightening. Amara looked at him gently. "I'm sorry." He nodded, eyes fixed on the table. "It's been 2 years. Some days it feels like yesterday. Some days it feels like forever." Her heart ached for him, for the quiet strength it must take to carry so much, for the tenderness with which he protected his daughter's fragile world. And in that moment, she wanted to tell him everything. To say, "My name isn't Maya, I'm Amara Johnson. The world outside this door would tear us apart if it found us together." But fear bound her lips. Instead, she reached across the table, brushing her fingers against his hand. The touch lingered, a spark that made his breath hitch almost imperceptibly. Daniel's eyes met hers, steady, searching. "Who are you really, Maya?" he asked softly. Her heart hammered in her chest. The truth rose to her lips, desperate to be freed. But in the space of a single heartbeat, she swallowed it down. She offered a smile instead, small, fragile, and laced with all the weight of the secret she carried. "Just someone trying to find her way," she whispered. He studied her for a long moment, then nodded slowly, accepting the answer he knew wasn't the whole truth. And Amara realized that each day she spent here, every tender moment with Daniel and Lily, was another thread woven into a tapestry of lies, beautiful, fragile, and bound to unravel. The days slipped quietly into one another, each marked not by the sound of orchestra or the flash of cameras, but by the soft scrape of Daniel's tools against wood, the bubbling laughter of Lily, and the unexpected rhythm of a life Amara had never known she longed for. Each morning, sunlight streamed through the workshop's wide windows, casting long golden stripes across the workbenches. Amara found herself drawn there, watching Daniel's hands as they moved with deliberate care, sanding away imperfections from a carved chair or fitting delicate inlays into an antique desk. "You work like it matters," she said once, leaning against the doorway. Daniel glanced up, the faintest smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. "It does matter. These pieces have history. They've survived. They just need someone to believe they're worth saving." Amara felt her breath catch at his words. She wondered if he realized he wasn't only talking about wood. She began to help in small ways, sweeping sawdust, polishing brass handles, organizing the brushes and varnishes. But it wasn't long before her presence shifted from helpful to quietly indispensable. One afternoon, she noticed Daniel considering a desk with an uncertain frown. "It's late 19th century, he murmured, running a finger over the worn surface. "Maybe oak." Rosewood, Amara corrected, gently, surprising herself. When he raised an eyebrow, she added, "You can tell by the grain and the reddish undertones. It's rare, worth much more than you think." Daniel studied her curiosity flickering in his eyes. How do you know that? Amara hesitated, her pulse quickening. She couldn't tell him the truth that she had spent countless hours with private tutors who trained her to identify antique furniture as easily as she could recite Shakespeare. So instead, she offered the smallest fragment of truth she could. My grandmother collected antiques, she said softly. I used to watch her appraisers work. It wasn't a lie, but it wasn't the whole truth either. Daniel nodded slowly, still watching her. You've got an eye for detail. The warmth in his tone made her chest tighten. She smiled faintly, forcing herself not to flinch under the weight of the unspoken questions in his gaze. That evening, as they ate a simple dinner, grilled fish and roasted vegetables, Lily proudly displayed her latest drawing, the three of them beneath a sun as bright as a golden coin. See, she announced, you belong here, Maya. Amara's throat constricted. It's beautiful, she whispered, brushing her fingers over the page. Daniel glanced at her, his expression unreadable, though something in his eyes softened. She doesn't let many people in, he said quietly. Not since her mom. He trailed off, his jaw tightening. Amara looked at him gently. I'm sorry. He nodded, eyes fixed on the table. It's been 2 years. Some days it feels like yesterday. Some days it feels like forever. Her heart ached for him, for the quiet strength it must take to carry so much, for the tenderness with which he protected his daughter's fragile world. And in that moment, she wanted to tell him everything. To say, my name isn't Maya, I'm Amara Johnson. The world outside this door would tear us apart if it found us together. But fear bound her lips. Instead, she reached across the table, brushing her fingers against his hand. The touch lingered, a spark that made his breath hitch almost imperceptibly. Daniel's eyes met hers, steady, searching. Who are you really, Maya? He asked softly. Her heart hammered in her chest. The truth rose to her lips, desperate to be freed. But in the space of a single heartbeat, she swallowed it down. She offered a smile instead, small, fragile, and laced with all the weight of the secret she carried. Just someone trying to find her way, she whispered. He studied her for a long moment, then nodded slowly, accepting the answer he knew wasn't the whole truth. And Amara realized that each day she spent here, every tender moment with Daniel and Lily, was another thread woven into a tapestry of lies, beautiful, fragile, and bound to unravel. The Oregon coast wore a restless face that evening. Clouds gathered in thick, brooding swirls above the sea, their bellies heavy with rain, and the air carried the electricity of a storm waiting to break. In the workshop, the light of a single lantern painted warm circles on the walls as Daniel, Amara, and Lily settled in for the night. The power had flickered twice already, and with each dimming, Lily had drawn closer to Amara, clutching her stuffed rabbit tightly. Will it be loud? Lily asked, her voice hushed as the first rumble of thunder rolled over the ocean. Amara smoothed back a curl from the girl's forehead. It might be, she admitted softly, but sometimes storms sound scarier than they really are, and they always pass. Daniel's gaze lingered on her from across the room, his hand steady as he lit a few candles and set them on the table. Their glow caught the strong lines of his face, softening him in a way Amara had never seen before. When the power gave one last shudder and finally failed, the room was left in a cocoon of candlelight, the rain beginning its steady assault against the windows. Lily whimpered, burrowing into Amara's lap. Would you like me to tell you a story? Amara asked gently. The girl nodded, wide-eyed. Amara hesitated, searching her memory. Then, almost without thinking, she began to weave a tale. Once upon a time, she whispered, there was a girl who lived in a tall golden tower. Everyone believed she had everything she could ever want, jewels, gowns, banquets that stretched farther than the eye could see. But what no one knew was that the girl was terribly lonely because the tower had no door. She could see the world, but she could never touch it. Lily's breathing slowed as she listened, her thumb tucked against her lips. Daniel leaned against the wall, arms folded loosely, his eyes fixed on Amara, as though he too had been caught by the spell of her words. One night, Amara continued, a storm rolled in, just like this one, and the girl decided she couldn't stay locked away any longer. So she climbed down the tower into the rain, even though she didn't know where the road would lead. Was she scared? Lily murmured sleepily. Very, Amara admitted, her own throat tightening with the truth threaded through the tale. But sometimes being brave doesn't mean you're not afraid. It just means you go anyway. Lily nestled closer, her eyes fluttering shut. Within minutes, her breathing evened her small frame, warm and trusting against Amara's. The silence that followed was not empty, but charged, filled with the quiet hum of the storm outside and the unspoken words between the two adults left awake. Daniel stepped closer, his green eyes steady in the candlelight. "That was a good story," he said softly. Amara smiled faintly, her hands still resting on Lily's back. It wasn't just a story. His brow furrowed as though he wanted to ask more, to press gently against the veil she had drawn around herself. But instead he knelt carefully, lifting Lily into his arms. The girl stirred only slightly, her stuffed rabbit still clutched tightly. Daniel carried her down the hall, returning moments later, his expression unreadable. "She likes you," he said quietly, almost as though confessing a secret. Amara looked down at her hands. "I like her too." The storm cracked outside, lightning illuminating the room for a fleeting heartbeat. Daniel's gaze lingered on her, searching, weighing. Then slowly he crossed the space between them and sat beside her on the couch. For a long while they said nothing, the storm filling the silence with its restless music. Their shoulders brushed just barely, but the warmth of it sent a shiver racing down Amara's spine. Finally, Daniel spoke, his voice low. "You've brought something back into this house I didn't realize was missing." Amara turned toward him, her pulse quickening. "What's that?" His eyes held hers unflinching. "Light." The word lingered between them, heavy with meaning. Her breath caught. And before she could think better of it, before fear could remind her of the lies she lived within, she leaned in just enough for her lips to graze his. The kiss was soft at first, hesitant, like a secret whispered into the dark. But when Daniel's hand brushed gently against her cheek, she felt the world outside her father, the name she had left behind the storm raging against the windows, fall away. For the first time in her life, she wasn't the daughter of Richard Johnson. She wasn't a prize in a deal. She wasn't a gilded prisoner. She was simply a woman kissing a man whose warmth reached into the coldest corners of her soul. And in that moment, she allowed herself to believe in the impossible, that maybe, just maybe, she could build a new life here. The storm raged deep into the night, its winds howling against the wooden walls of Hayes Restoration. But inside the workshop, time seemed to slow. The kiss lingered, gentle, searching, hesitant, like two souls daring to touch after years of silence. When they parted, Amara's breath trembled against the candlelit air. Daniel's eyes, so steady and green, searched hers as though he were trying to understand a truth she hadn't spoken aloud. "I shouldn't," Amara whispered, her voice barely audible. "Neither should I," Daniel murmured, though his thumb brushed her cheek as if reluctant to let go. "But sometimes what we shouldn't do is exactly what we need." A silence fell, not awkward, but charged, every heartbeat echoing louder than the storm outside. Amara lowered her gaze, her lips still tingling from the softness of his. She had been kissed before, polite, rehearsed gestures from men who treated her like a prize rather than a person, but never like this. Never with such tenderness, as though she were something precious and real. The rain outside thickened, and when lightning flashed, Amara rose from the couch, moving to the window. The glass was cool beneath her fingers. Beyond the world was blurred the storm's fury, turning everything to silver and shadow. She felt Daniel's presence behind her before she heard him move, a quiet gravity pulling her closer. "You don't have to be afraid here," he said softly, standing beside her. "I'm not afraid of the storm," she replied, her voice unsteady. "I wasn't talking about the storm." Her breath caught. She turned to him, her eyes glistening with emotions she could barely name. Daniel's face was etched with sincerity, his jaw tense, as if he too was holding back more than he dared to say. A sudden clap of thunder made Lily stir in the next room. Both of them froze, listening. When the child's soft breathing resumed, Daniel exhaled in quiet relief. Amara smiled faintly. "She's braver than I am." Daniel shook his head. "You're braver than you think. Running into a storm takes more courage than staying behind." His words pierced her because they held a truth he couldn't possibly know. She wanted to tell him everything, to confess that the gown she had arrived in was not a costume, that she had walked away from a life of wealth and control, that the name Maya was a shield she could only carry for so long. But the fear of losing this fragile refuge chained her silence. Instead, she whispered, "What if the storm never ends?" Daniel's hand found hers warm and steady despite the chill in the air. "Then we face it together." Her chest tightened. The words were simple, but they unraveled her carefully built walls, leaving her vulnerable and trembling. She turned toward him fully, and this time, when their lips met, the kiss was no longer tentative. It was deeper, fuller, a quiet surrender to something neither of them had expected, but both desperately needed. The storm outside roared, wind lashing the walls, rain hammering the roof like a furious drumbeat. Yet within the workshop, the world softened. Their shadows danced on the walls in the candlelight, two lives beginning to intertwine in a fragile, dangerous hope. When they finally parted, Amara leaned her forehead against his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. It was strong, sure, and real, so unlike the hollow rhythms of the world she had left behind. Daniel's hand rested lightly against her back. "I don't know who you really are," he murmured, his voice rough with honesty, "but I know I don't want tonight to be the last time I hold you." Her throat tightened. She closed her eyes, letting herself sink into the warmth of him, even as the secret she carried burned at the edges of her peace. For tonight at least she allowed herself to believe in the promise hidden in his words. Outside, the storm finally began to ebb, the rain softening into a steady drizzle. And for Amara, standing in Daniel's arms, the night no longer felt like a prison of fear. It felt like the first fragile step toward freedom. The storm had passed, leaving the coastal town bathed in crisp sunlight. The streets, still damp, sparkled under a clear blue sky, as though the heavens had been scrubbed clean overnight. The scent of salt and pine drifted in the air, mingling with something sweeter, freshly baked bread from the cafe on the corner, caramel from the kettle corn stand that Lily tugged Amara toward with eager little hands. It was the day of the town's autumn festival of lights, a tradition Daniel explained with quiet pride as they walked together down the cobblestone street. Stalls lined the square, each draped in strings of lanterns that swayed gently in the breeze. Children ran past with painted faces, laughter ringing like bells, while older couples strolled arm in arm, their smiles easy and unhurried. Amara had never seen anything like it. She had attended charity galas glittering with crystal chandeliers and orchestras flown in from across the world, yet none of those lavish affairs had ever felt this alive. Here no one cared who she was or what she represented. Here she wasn't the Johnson heiress, a piece in her father's calculated empire. She was simply Maya, a woman walking beside a man whose hand brushed against hers in the most unassuming, heart-stirring way. "Daddy, can we get caramel apples?" Lily chirped, her curls bouncing with each step. Daniel smiled, handing her a few crumpled bills. "One for you, and don't forget to share." Lily darted off, leaving them briefly alone amid the swirl of lights and music. Amara glanced up at Daniel. The glow of the lanterns reflected in his green eyes, softening the edges of his features. He seemed at home here, surrounded by neighbors who greeted him with nods and warm smiles. He wasn't the kind of man who needed to be announced. He simply was steady as the tide, known not by wealth but by trust. "You belong here," she said softly, almost to herself. Daniel's eyes flicked to hers. "And you?" Her lips curved faintly. "For the first time in a long while, I think I do." He didn't answer right away, but his gaze lingered intense and thoughtful, as if he were memorizing the moment. Then, without warning, the first notes of music filled the square, fiddles and guitars, cheerful and bright. Couples began to gather under the lanterns, moving together as the melody carried them. Lily returned her caramel apple in hand and laughed when she saw the dancers. "Daddy danced with Maya." Heat rushed to Amara's cheeks. "Oh, I don't know if—" But Daniel only extended his hand, his smile gentle but insistent. "She's not going to let us out of it." Hesitantly, Amara placed her hand in his. His touch was firm yet tender, guiding her into the circle of light. As they moved to the music, her laughter bubbled unbidden, surprising even herself. She had danced countless times before in ballrooms filled with gilded strangers, but never like this. Never with her heart so light it felt as though it might lift from her chest. Daniel leaned closer, his breath warm against her ear. "You look happy." "I am," she admitted softly, her eyes glistening. "And that scares me." "Why?" "Because I don't know how long it can last." He drew her closer, their steps slowing as the music swelled. Then let's make it last as long as we can. The world around them blurred the laughter, the music, the lanterns swaying in the evening breeze. All Amara could see was the man holding her steady and sure as though he had always been meant to find her. When the song ended, applause erupted, and Lily clapped furiously from the edge of the circle, her smile wide enough to light the entire square. Daniel didn't release Amara's hand, and she didn't pull away. Later that night, as they walked home beneath a sky strung with stars and lanterns that still glowed softly in the distance, Daniel spoke quietly, his voice carrying an intimacy that made her chest ache. "I don't know who you were before you came through my door, Maya, and I won't ask unless you want to tell me. But I know who you are to me now." Her steps faltered. "And who is that?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. He stopped, turning to face her fully, his hand brushing a damp curl from her cheek. "The woman who makes this place feel alive again." The words struck deep, breaking through every carefully built wall around her heart. She wanted to tell him everything then, to throw off the mask of Maya and let him see Amara, all of her fragile and flawed. But fear held her tongue. So instead, she let her hand linger in his, silently praying the truth wouldn't steal this fragile happiness away too soon. The night after the Festival of Lights was heavy with stillness, the kind that seemed almost too calm, as though the world itself was holding its breath. The lanterns from the celebration still glimmered faintly in the distance when they returned to the workshop apartment, laughter lingering on their lips like the fading echo of music. Lily had fallen asleep against Amara's shoulder on the walk home, her little hand curled trustingly around Amara's fingers. Daniel had carried her the last few blocks, his jacket draped gently around her small body. They had tucked her into bed with a stuffed rabbit nestled at her side, her face peaceful beneath the soft glow of her nightlight. But sometime deep into the night, the peace fractured. Amara awoke to the sound of a faint whimper. She rose quickly, the remnants of a dream dissolving, as she slipped down the hall to Lily's room. The girl tossed restlessly under her quilt, her cheeks flushed with a feverish glow. "Lily," Amara whispered, brushing damp curls from her forehead. The child stirred, her eyes glassy as she murmured, "Mama." The word pierced Amara's heart with a sharp ache of longing and fear. She swallowed hard, forcing calm into her voice. "Shh, I'm here." Daniel appeared in the doorway moments later, his face tense, green eyes shadowed with worry. He crossed quickly to the bedside, kneeling opposite Amara, his hand pressed gently against Lily's forehead. "She's burning up," he said quietly, his jaw tightening. "I'll get some water," Amara whispered, rising to fetch a cool cloth. Together they worked in hushed urgency. Amara dabbed Lily's skin with the damp cloth, whispering soothing words while Daniel prepared a small dose of medicine. The hours blurred as they sat on either side of the bed, watching the rise and fall of Lily's fragile chest, their own breaths caught in a rhythm of shared fear. At one point, Daniel's hand brushed Amara's as he adjusted the quilt. She glanced up, meeting his eyes in the dim light. He looked exhausted, lines of strain etched deeper into his face, but beneath the worry was something more: trust, a silent acknowledgement that he didn't have to face this night alone. Amara leaned down, humming softly the same lullaby her mother used to sing when fevers kept her awake as a child. Lily's restless fidgeting stilled her breathing evening out little by little. When at last the child settled into a more peaceful sleep, Amara sagged back into the chair, relief washing over her like a tide. "You were amazing with her," Daniel murmured, his voice rough with exhaustion. "I just did what I could," Amara replied softly. He shook his head, his gaze steady. "You gave her comfort, I couldn't." His hand lingered briefly over hers, his thumb brushing against her skin. "She called you Mama." The word hung in the air, fragile and luminous. Amara's chest tightened painfully. "I know." Daniel's eyes searched hers as though trying to understand the emotions she couldn't speak aloud. Finally he whispered, "She doesn't do that with anyone." Her throat constricted. She wanted to tell him how deeply Lily's trust had touched her, how much it terrified her, because it was built on the fragile foundation of a lie. Instead, she only nodded, tears glimmering in her eyes. Daniel leaned back, running a hand through his hair, the candlelight catching in the strands. "I don't know how you came into our lives, Maya, but I'm grateful you did." Her heart ached at the truth hidden behind the name she had given him. She wanted to confess to say, I'm not who you think I am, and if you knew the truth, you might not want me here. But the words never came. Instead, she leaned forward, resting her head briefly against his shoulder. He let her, his hand brushing against hers in a quiet promise of solidarity. For that long, tender moment, with the sound of Lily's steady breathing between them, Amara felt something she hadn't known in years, the fragile, dangerous hope of belonging. Outside, the wind whispered against the windows, carrying with it the first hints of dawn. The fever had broken. But in Amara's heart, another fire had begun, one she could not put out, no matter how dangerous it might be. The morning light spilled gently into Lily's room, soft and golden, as though the world itself had been reborn after the fevered night. The little girl stirred her eyelashes, fluttering against flushed cheeks. When her eyes opened, the fever's glassy haze was gone, replaced by the clear, innocent brightness that had always reminded Daniel of her mother. "Mama," she whispered hoarsely, her small hand reaching toward Amara, who sat dozing lightly in the chair beside the bed. The word pierced Amara's heart with both sweetness and pain. She opened her eyes, her fingers instantly curling around Lily's. "I'm here," she said softly, brushing a cool hand across the child's forehead. Relief washed through her. The fever had truly broken. Daniel leaned in from the doorway, his eyes weary but lit with quiet gratitude. "How are you feeling, sweetheart?" "Better," Lily murmured, but her gaze didn't leave Amara. She nestled closer, tugging at Amara's sleeve with surprising insistence. "Don't go." Amara's throat tightened. "I'm not going anywhere," she whispered, smoothing the quilt over the child's small frame. Daniel stepped forward, crouching beside the bed. He glanced at Amara, and for a moment their eyes held. It was as though Lily had spoken aloud a truth neither of them dared to say, that Amara had become more than a guest. She was part of something neither of them had realized they were missing until now. The hours that followed were quiet, tender. Lily drifted in and out of sleep, but each time she woke, her hand reached instinctively for Amara. Together, Amara and Daniel read from Lily's favorite storybook, their voices weaving together as the girl nestled between them. When Lily laughed weakly at a silly illustration, Daniel looked at Amara with a softness that unraveled her resolve. Later, as the afternoon sunlight warmed the small kitchen, Daniel made tea while Amara sat at the table sketching with Lily. The little girl insisted on drawing their family. "See," Lily said, holding up the picture proudly. 3 stick figures stood beneath a bright sun, their hands joined. The tallest, labeled Daddy, stood beside a smaller figure in a purple dress labeled Mama. Between them was Lily herself, smiling wide. Amara's eyes blurred with tears. She quickly blinked away. "It's beautiful," she whispered. Daniel set down the mugs and glanced at the drawing. A faint smile touched his lips. "You're quite the artist," he told Lily, though his gaze lingered on the purple dress figure longer than the others. That evening, after Lily had finally fallen into a peaceful sleep, Amara stood on the small balcony overlooking the ocean. The waves rolled gently now, silvered under the rising moon. She wrapped the quilt around her shoulders, the cool breeze tangling her curls. She didn't hear Daniel approach until his voice, quiet and steady, broke the silence. "Thank you." She turned, startled. "For what?" "For being here. For her. For me." He stepped closer, his expression unguarded, his green eyes raw with sincerity. "Last night, I don't know how I would have managed without you." Amara's chest ached. "She's such a brave little girl." "She gets it from her mother," Daniel said softly, his gaze drifting toward Lily's window. Then after a pause, he added, "But you brought her something. Even I couldn't. Comfort. She hasn't called anyone Mama since—" He stopped, his voice thick with emotion. Amara swallowed hard, tears threatening. "Daniel?" He reached for her hand, his fingers brushing hers. The warmth of his touch spread through her, steadying and unraveling her all at once. "I don't know your past, Maya, and maybe I don't need to, but I know what I see now." Her breath caught. "And what do you see?" He hesitated, then said with quiet certainty, "A woman who feels like she belongs here with us." The words sank deep, filling the hollow places she had carried for so long. She wanted to tell him the truth, then to confess everything, to tear down the fragile walls of her lie. But fear whispered cruelly, "If he knew who you really were, this dream would vanish." So she squeezed his hand gently, letting her silence speak in place of the truth she couldn't yet give. In that moment, under the watchful moon, in the steady rhythm of the sea, Amara let herself imagine it, a life not gilded, but real, where laughter filled the mornings, love warmed the evenings, and Lily's voice called her Mama without hesitation. A family dream, fragile, impossible, yet tonight achingly beautiful. The days that followed were a gentle rhythm. Amara had never known quiet breakfasts with Lily, chattering between spoonfuls of cereal afternoons, spent helping Daniel in the workshop, and evenings reading together by the fire. Each moment wove another thread into the tapestry of belonging she had once thought impossible for herself. But Daniel had been carrying something close to his heart, waiting for the right moment. Amara felt it in the way his gaze lingered when he thought she wasn't looking, in the soft hesitation before he let go of her hand, in the careful hope etched in every smile. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the horizon in shades of gold and rose, Daniel asked her to come with him. He led her down a narrow path she had never noticed before, lined with wildflowers swaying gently in the coastal breeze. Lily, worn out from the day's play, had fallen asleep at home, leaving them alone in the hush of twilight. At the end of the path stood a willow tree, its branches cascading like a curtain of emerald silk. Tiny fairy lights twinkled among the leaves, their glow warm and magical. Beneath the tree, a blanket was spread across the grass, and beside it a small box rested atop a folded quilt. Amara's breath caught. "Daniel, what is this?" He smiled faintly, a mixture of nerves and quiet determination in his eyes. "A place I wanted to share with you. This tree, my grandmother used to bring me here when I was a boy. She always said willow branches were like arms. They bend, they protect, they shelter." He paused, his gaze steady on hers. "I thought tonight it might shelter us." The words wrapped around her heart like a promise. She stepped closer, her fingers brushing over the lights strung delicately across the branches. It felt like stepping into a dream, one she was afraid to wake from. Daniel reached for the small box. His hands, usually so steady with wood and tools, trembled slightly as he opened it. Inside gleamed a simple ring, its band slender, the stone modest yet beautiful, set in an antique design that spoke of history rather than wealth. Amara's breath hitched. "Daniel." He took her hand, his green eyes luminous in the fading light. "I know your past is a story you're not ready to tell," he said softly, "and I don't need all the details to know what my heart already does. Since the moment you walked through my door, you've changed this house. You've changed me. Lily calls you Mama, and I'd be lying if I said it didn't feel right, because it does, more right than anything has in years." Tears blurred Amara's vision as he knelt, his voice growing steadier. "I'm not offering you riches or fame. I can only give you this life, small, imperfect, sometimes messy. But it's real, and I want to share it with you. Will you marry me, Maya?" Her heart thundered, torn between the overwhelming love that surged inside her and the secret that chained her soul. She had dreamed of this, of a love not arranged, not bargained for, but chosen. And yet the name he spoke, Maya, was not hers. Could she accept such a promise while hiding the truth? Her lips trembled as she whispered, "Daniel, I—" But before she could finish, the sound of engines shattered the tender stillness. Headlights flared through the trees, cold and sharp, slicing into their sanctuary. Black SUVs pulled onto the grass tires, crunching against the earth. Daniel rose instantly, protective instinct flashing in his eyes. "What is this?" Amara froze, her chest constricting. She knew. She had known deep down that this moment of fragile happiness could not last forever. The door of the lead SUV opened, and out stepped a man whose presence darkened the twilight itself. Richard Johnson, her father. His gaze locked onto her, hard as steel, as two guards flanked him. Daniel turned to her, bewildered, hurt, searching her face for answers. "Maya, what's going on?" Her heart broke under the weight of his gaze. The lie she had built, the dream she had dared to hold, was crumbling. And as the storm of truth descended upon them, beneath the willow's glowing branches, Amara realized her choice was no longer hers alone. The moment of love she had longed for had been stolen, replaced with the reckoning she had feared all along. The air beneath the willow seemed to freeze the soft glow of the fairy lights, trembling against the harsh glare of headlights. Amara's breath caught in her throat as her father stepped forward, his presence towering, commanding, as if he had carried the walls of her gilded prison here to find her. Amara, Richard Johnson's voice cut through the night, cold and sharp as a blade. Enough of this foolishness. It's time to come home. The name hung in the air like a curse. Daniel's eyes snapped to her confusion, flickering into disbelief. Amara. Not Maya. Not the woman he thought he knew. She felt her heart fracture under the weight of his gaze. Daniel. She whispered, her voice trembling, but words failed her. Richard's men stepped closer, their shadows stretching long across the grass. You've humiliated this family enough, her father continued, his tone dripping with disdain. Running off like some reckless child, do you have any idea the chaos you've caused? The world is watching, Amara. Do you intend to throw it all away for this? His eyes flicked toward Daniel, the contempt unmistakable. This carpenter. Daniel's jaw tightened, his body angling protectively toward her, despite the storm raging in his expression. What is he talking about? He demanded quietly, his voice low but fierce. Amara's chest constricted. The lie she had carried so carefully had unraveled in a single word. She tried to reach for him, her hand trembling, but he stepped back, hurt, flashing across his face like a wound. You lied to me, he said, his voice raw. From the moment you walked into my life, you lied. Tears blurred her vision. I didn't mean to, she pleaded, her voice breaking. I had to hide. If I told you the truth, I would have lost all of this before it even began. Daniel, please, you have to believe me. Everything else was real. My feelings for you are real. But the pain in his eyes was undeniable, a silent battle between love and betrayal. Lily's small voice broke the moment. She had woken and come running down the path, clutching her stuffed rabbit to her chest. Mama, she called, her innocent eyes wide as they flicked between Amara and the looming strangers. Richard's scowl deepened. You let her call you that, he snapped. Do you enjoy weaving lies even into the heart of a child? Amara's knees weakened under the cruelty of his words. She dropped down, gathering Lily into her arms, holding her close. It wasn't a lie, she whispered fiercely, her tears falling into the child's curls. Not to me. Daniel stood rigid, his chest rising and falling with the weight of what he had just learned. He looked at them, at Amara, clutching Lily at the guards, waiting for her father's command. And for a moment his eyes softened, torn between anger and the undeniable bond he had watched grow. But the fracture remained. Richard stepped forward, his tone ironclad. Amara, get up. You will come with me now. Do not make this harder than it already is. Amara clung to Lily for a moment longer, then gently placed her back into Daniel's arms. Her voice trembled as she whispered, Be brave for me, Lily. The little girl shook her head, tears welling. Don't go, Mama. Her heart broke cleanly in two. She pressed a kiss to Lily's forehead and forced herself to stand, her body shaking as she faced Daniel. I never meant to hurt you, she said softly, every word laced with anguish. But if I don't go with him, he'll take everything from you. Your business. Lily, I can't let him destroy what you've built. Please, believe that I love you. Daniel's jaw clenched, his hand tightening around Lily's small shoulder. He didn't answer. The storm in his eyes spoke louder than words. Richard's men moved closer. Amara cast one last look at Daniel, her eyes pleading, desperate, and filled with the love she couldn't protect. Then, with her heart shattering, she allowed herself to be led toward the waiting car. As the doors closed behind her, the willow lights flickered faintly as though mourning the dream that had just been torn apart. And for Daniel, standing beneath their fading glow with Lily clutching his side, the world felt colder than the harshest winter, because the woman who had brought light back into his life had been taken away, leaving only questions, pain, and the echo of a love that might never return. The ride back to the Johnson estate was silent, save for the low hum of the engine and the rain that still clung stubbornly to the windows. Amara sat stiffly in the back seat of her father's black SUV, her hands folded tightly in her lap. her chest aching as though her very heart had been left behind beneath the willow tree. She could still see Daniel's face, the pain in his eyes, the way Lily had clutched her rabbit and begged her not to go. The memory cut deeper than any blade. Richard Johnson sat across from her, his gaze cold, calculating. "You've embarrassed this family enough," he said finally, his tone a measured threat. "The world already knows you fled. I've spent days smothering the rumors, covering your recklessness. Do you understand the damage you've done?" Amara's throat tightened. She wanted to scream that she didn't care about the damage to his reputation, that she would rather live penniless in Daniel's workshop than suffocate one more day in his golden cage. But she knew her father too well. "You will marry Marcus." Richard continued, his eyes narrowing, "and you will do so without complaint. This family's standing depends on it." Her chest heaved, fury and despair colliding inside her. "I can't," she whispered. "I don't love him. I never will." Her father's mouth tightened into a hard line. "Love is a fantasy, Amara. Stability, power, security, those are what matter. You had your little indulgence with that carpenter. Now it ends." At the word carpenter, Amara's heart flinched. Daniel. His strong hands, his steady voice, the way he had looked at her, as though she were not a pawn, but a person. Richard leaned forward, his voice low and sharp. "And let me be very clear. If you defy me again, I will not only ruin him, I will take his daughter. Do you think a man like Daniel Hayes has the means to fight me in court? Custody battles are expensive. I can bury him under a mountain of lawyers until Lily is his no longer." Amara's blood ran cold. She stared at her father, horror choking her. "You wouldn't." "I would," Richard said without hesitation. "Don't test me." Her hands shook as she gripped the folds of her dress. The image of Lily's bright eyes and trusting smile flashed before her, her sweet voice calling her Mama. The thought of that innocent child torn from Daniel's arms because of her, she couldn't bear it. Her father leaned back, satisfied with her silence. "Good. You understand then. Tomorrow we'll make an announcement to repair your reputation. The wedding will be rescheduled as soon as possible." Amara turned her face toward the window, blinking back tears as the mansion came into view, its towering gates yawning open like the mouth of a beast ready to swallow her whole. Inside, chandeliers still glittered, flowers still bloomed in perfect arrangements, and every surface gleamed with wealth. But to her it felt like a prison, more suffocating than ever. That night alone in her vast bedroom, Amara collapsed onto the edge of the bed, clutching the drawing Lily had slipped into her pocket before she left. 3 stick figures beneath a bright sun, their hands joined. The purple-dressed woman smiled between Daniel and Lily, a simple, innocent dream of a family. Her tears blurred the crayon lines as she pressed the drawing to her chest. "I'll do it," she told herself silently. "I'll give up everything. I'll let him believe I betrayed him. I'll marry Marcus if I must. But I will not let them take Lily from him. I won't let my love destroy the only family she has left." It was the cruelest choice she had ever made, sacrificing her own happiness to protect theirs. But as her father's words echoed in her mind, she knew it was the only choice. Somewhere beyond the mansion's gates, Daniel and Lily slept without her. Perhaps they dreamed of her still. And though the weight of loss threatened to crush her, Amara clung to one fragile hope, that love this deep, this true, could not be silenced forever. Even if she had to walk into the fire, she vowed to find her way back to them someday. The mansion's golden halls stretched endlessly, yet Amara felt only emptiness as she moved through them. The crystal chandeliers glittered above the marble floors, gleamed beneath her feet, and servants moved silently through the corridors, bowing as she passed. To the outside world, she was once again the flawless daughter of Richard Johnson, returned to her rightful place. But in her heart, she was still that woman standing beneath the willow tree, trembling in Daniel Hayes's arms, believing in a love she had thought impossible. The days that followed blurred together. Designers brought in gowns, jewelers placed velvet boxes before her, and Marcus Sterling visited with polished smiles and hollow words of reassurance. She responded as expected, offering the faintest of smiles, nodding at the right moments. Yet every night alone in her room, she clutched Lily's crayon, drawing against her chest, and wept in silence. Meanwhile, on the other side of town, the workshop stood quieter than ever. Daniel moved through the days with mechanical precision, his hands sanding wood-fitting joints, brushing on varnish. But the rhythm that had once brought him peace now only echoed the hollow ache inside. Lily asked each morning if Mama was coming back. Daniel would pull her close, pressing a kiss to her curls, and answer, with the only truth he could bear, "I don't know, sweetheart." And though he tried to shield her, Lily's eyes dimmed a little more with each unanswered day. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the horizon, Daniel sat on the porch with Lily curled against his side. She held her stuffed rabbit close, her voice small as she whispered, "Daddy, do you think Mama stopped loving us?" Daniel's throat tightened. "No, baby," he murmured, brushing away a tear that slipped down her cheek. She didn't stop. Sometimes love has to be quiet for a while, but it never goes away. Lily nodded solemnly as though her young heart understood more than it should. Across town, Amara stood before her father's study window, staring out at the darkened sky. The house hummed with preparations for her rescheduled wedding. Yet she felt as though every candle and every silk flower mocked her. She remembered Daniel's words beneath the willow. "I don't know who you were before you came through my door, Maya, but I know who you are to me now." Her hands trembled as she unfolded Lily's drawing again. The crayon colors had begun to smudge at the edges, but the sun still shone bright above the three smiling figures. She traced the lines with her fingertip, a single tear slipping onto the paper. In that moment, Amara understood that her father could command her body, dictate her actions, and silence her voice, but he could not extinguish the love burning inside her. She would endure this gilded cage for as long as she must, but one day she would find her way back to Daniel and Lily. Because love like this did not vanish. It endured storms. It survived silence. It lived in the smallest of things, a child's laugh, a remembered touch, a drawing clutched close to the heart. That night, as the world around her celebrated her return to duty, Amara whispered a vow into the quiet of her room. "Wait for me. No matter how long it takes, I will come back to you." And in the workshop, as Daniel tucked Lily into bed, he found her clutching the drawing once more. He brushed a curl from her forehead and whispered his own promise into the dark. "She'll find her way back. I believe it." Two souls torn apart by power and lies clung to the same fragile hope beneath different roofs. And though the world tried to keep them separate, love had already woven them together in ways no force could truly sever. The willow tree still stood on the edge of the town, its branches whispering softly in the night. It had once sheltered a promise of love, and it would again. For Amara and Daniel, this was not the end. It was the beginning of a fight for a love worth everything. And as you hold their story in your heart, remember that love in its truest form is not measured by the obstacles it faces, but by the strength it carries through them. If this journey has touched you, if Amara's courage and Daniel's quiet devotion stirred something in your soul, I invite you to keep the story alive. Share your thoughts in the comments. Let us know how their love has moved you, and follow this channel so you'll never miss the next chapter of stories that remind us all, true love is always worth the fight. Because somewhere under a willow lit by gentle lights, a promise still waits to be kept.